right. So, Adam, I want to start with you. Alicia Finley of the Wall Street Journal writes this about the fracking issue.
Yes.
She said, why did she reverse her 2019 support for a fracking ban? Last night, she did not explain, but she goes on to write, all that said, looks like Mr. Trump threw away his chance to deliver some knockout blows. He may not get another, because at this point, this is the only debate on the books, although Harris is now saying that she's open to another one.
Well, she did not explain her flip-flop on fracking, but allow me to. She wants votes. There are 120,000 people in the state of Pennsylvania employed in the oil and gas business. She needs and wants their votes. So Fox has cut a number of clips from over the past several years where she said, I will ban fracking. And now all of a sudden she realizes she needs votes.
Yeah, no, and she's making that move to the middle. People do this in the general. She's not the first candidate. I do want to bring in for the hot topic former Clinton senior advisor Mark Penn. Mark, good morning, and thank you for joining us. I'm sure you had a late night, as we did as well. And one of the big things here, Senator Tom Cotton was in the spin room last night after the debate, and Fox News Digital asked him, did tonight move the needle for either side? And he said he believes voters are reminded that they were good under Donald Trump's economy and that they were not under Kamala Harris's. Maybe go back to those good times. Did the former president actually articulate that last night, in your opinion?
Well, he did hit that point. I think he hit that point pretty clearly, that he thought America has gone downhill and was in desperate condition. Look, I think it's pretty clear when people score the debate on points. I think that they overwhelmingly think Harris won. Winning a debate is not the same thing as moving people on the issues. There was not a lot of this debate about really the issues, particularly the economy, in depth. And there were a lot of complaints, about the moderator coming out of this debate so far.
Yeah, I also, too, if you look at the issues that were discussed the most, the economy was there and immigration was there. But again, it goes back to the specifics. And one of the things that we as investors did not hear more about was the expiration of the Trump tax cuts. Was there a missed opportunity by Donald Trump last night, as he seemed to get flustered throughout the debate by her attacks and the baiting that she seemed to pull off effectively, to your point? Did he miss an opportunity to talk about what those tax cuts did for the American people? Because they are set to expire, and she and Biden have both said they will let them expire.
Well, I think in general, I noticed the president discusses the economy, over discusses immigration. He's got the immigration voters. They're with him. They got the point. If you want a closed border, they think that Harris would keep the border open. I think there was too little discussion of the economy, for sure. He should have dragged in more about all of the expenditures, the $6 trillion plus budget, the $5 trillion in tax increases, the different approach he has to creating opportunity. She says she's creating an opportunity economy, but it's pretty unclear how one-time payments of $6,000 or $25,000 compare to the lifetime benefits of having a job, which pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to someone, and the tax that inflation really does on middle-class people. So he did fail to really do that. Of course, the moderators kind of moved on from the economy rather quickly.
They did, and obviously there was a lot of pivoting away from those issues, and that's where I think that those that did care about the economy, which is the #1 issue for most Americans, there was a little bit of a short change that happened in general. Let's talk about this latest Harvard Caps Harris poll. Shows Trump and Harris in a dead heat. This happened just before last night's debate. Even 50-50 between the candidates when undecided respondents are factored in. The poll also shows a tie in a hypothetical four-way race, and that would include Cornel West and Green Party candidate Jill Stein. But among these registered voters, Trump led by 1.47% to Harris's 46%. That narrows his lead in the same poll since July. Mark, talk about the polls, talk about the numbers, and the state of play right now.
Well, the overall result shows that Democrats have come home to their choice, that the country is split right down the middle. But the atmospherics of the poll really favor Trump in a lot of ways, because almost 2/3 of the people are unhappy with the economy. Only 42% approve of the Biden administration. 52% approve of the job he did as president, and he's winning the major issues: the economy, immigration, and crime. You know, having said that, last night's debate was more about personality than policy, it seemed. And in terms of the personality contest, neither candidate is really winning or being able to pull off a win. Now, most people think because of New York and California, if it really was exactly tied, Trump might be ahead in the swing states by 1 or 2 points. But it is a very, very close race here going into this debate.
It's a nail biter, Mark. It is a nail biter, and you know the debate may or may not have swung those independents, and that's who needed to be reached last night, those moderates. Mark, it's great to see you. Mark Penn, thank you.